But it was only when the plate arrived, it turned out to be a plate of raw pig snout. So this moussoi is like there were four of us. We'd each ordered it, so we had these massive plates of raw pig snout, and there was just no way we could eat it. So I think we had to order another couple of bottles of Beaujolais and drink the wine and discreetly put the pig snout to one side.
Couldn't go more wrong.
Disaster. But it was only when the plate. Hello and welcome to Book Club with the Italian Wine Podcast. I'm your host, Richard Hough, and I'm delighted that you're joining us as we get between the vines with some of the best wine writing out there. So sit back, pour yourself a glass, and enjoy the show with the Italian Wine Podcast. This month, our guest is Tamlyn Currin. Tamlyn is slightly different to our other guests in that she doesn't have a book to sell at the moment. Is that right, Tamlyn? You're not selling a book, you've not republished a book, but she is nonetheless an award-winning wine writer. Hi, Tamlyn. Good morning. How are you?
Hi, Richard. How are you? I'm very well, thanks.
Good. Thank you for joining us this morning. It's greatly appreciated. Now, we first met, Tamlyn, at Book Corner at Wine to Wine in Verona in November. For those of our listeners who have never been, could you tell us a bit about your experience of Wine to Wine? What were your impressions of the event and why were you interested in attending the event?
I'd actually never been before, and I came because Hermione Ireland, who is the CEO of Academy de Van Library, contacted me and said she couldn't go. Would I be prepared to go in her place? So I kind of had zero expectations, and I'd just come back from Georgia, so I was busy and slightly distracted, and I had a couple of things to talk about, but I had almost no expectations really. I loved it. It was completely different. Normally when I go to events, everything is focused around the tasting. You visit vineyards, you speak to producers, but everything is about wine and tasting wine, especially for me in my job. This time it was really all about communication and communication around wine, and the buzz of energy was brilliant, but it also, for me, it was a chance to think differently and think perhaps outside of the bubble as a wine writer, spending time listening to and talking with people who come from different parts of the wine industry, whether it's marketing or, having to sell wine or sell books. So I think it was really refreshing for me and provocative, as in thought-provoking and positive. And I met people that I've seen their names, but never met them face to face. So that was a great thing for me as well. It was good for a networking point of view. Yeah,
that's a really interesting perspective. There were some tastings at Wine to Wine. There are some tastings at Wine to Wine, but as you say, it's more about communication and networking and interaction.
Absolutely. And the tastings were great because they were all blind and there really wasn't a reveal afterwards. But each tasting had a purpose to make you think and consider different things. So it wasn't about judging the wine, which is how I normally approach it. It was kind of sitting back and approaching this from a completely different point of view. So I actually found it a very intellectual couple of days.
Good. That's interesting. And you spoke at Book Corner on the topic of bibliodiversity. Could you explain what bibliodiversity is? Is that a word that you invented, or is that one that is in common parlance?
I wouldn't say it's in common parlance, but I also can't claim to have invented it.
Okay.
One of my roles is sustainability, and it's something that I'm actually doing a degree in at the moment, and it's something that is on the lips of everybody. And one of the things that we're all talking about is biodiversity. Diversity, I have come to believe, is one of the most important elements of resilience. And in the wine writing industry, but particularly when it comes to books, we're facing quite a few crises. People are reading less. People have got shorter attention spans. We're reading more and more online. more and more digital stuff. And bibliodiversity for me, especially when it comes to wine, and the other crisis that we're facing in the wine industry is that we are losing younger drinkers. So there is not a generation of wine drinkers that seems to be coming through. Bibliodiversity for me is a diversity of styles, genres, formats, and voices in wine books. Because for many years, there's only really been one kind of wine book, and that was fairly pedagogical, quite often pedantic. It was telling people about classic regions and telling people what they should know in a particular way, and very often aimed at a certain audience and written by a particular group of people. And so much has changed over the years in the way that we communicate. And I really believe that if we're going to go forward with a resilient, healthy, thriving wine book community industry audience, then our wine books need to reflect that communication has changed and the way that we're communicating has changed, and that also the audience has changed and the writers have changed. It's a much wider audience than it was before. So I would just love to see people looking at different book formats. I'd love to see more younger people writing about books, people from different backgrounds. I love what Robert Joseph is doing at the moment with his book, The Wine People, which is using AI generated characters to reflect people who are not wine trade people, but people who just drink wine in their everyday lives and the different ways that they drink wine. And it's quite an interactive book, which crosses the boundaries between digital and print. And I think that that's a very exciting thing to do. So it is about more voices, more formats.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And what really resonates with me there is this idea of people having shorter attention spans and people reading less. I know from my own personal experience that is absolutely true. I guess the one area where I'm bucking the trend is this idea that people are drinking less. That's certainly not my experience, but in terms of reading and concentration span, yes. And you also led a networking session, writing a good book. It takes a tribe. And again, speaking from personal experience, I know that writing a book can sometimes be quite a solitary experience. So can you expand a bit on this concept of writing as a tribe?
It's slightly a soapbox issue for me.
That's okay.
I get to review a lot of books because one of my roles in the team at jr.com is that I write pretty much all the book reviews. So every year I can be sent up to 50 books related to wine in one way or another. And I plow through them every year. And I've seen an increasing trend towards, and it is based on self-publishing, and I think this is because it's very, very difficult to get into publishing houses. Because things have changed. It is very difficult to get past the doors of the publishing houses. They've got they're real big gatekeepers. So I understand the reason for self-publishing, and I'm not saying that all self-published books are terrible, because some of them are brilliant. Some of the best books I've reviewed are self-published, but the challenge with self-publishing is that very often the solitary exercise and process of writing a book, which is very solitary, stays solitary all the way to the end. And some of the worst books that have come across my desk have all been self-published. Two reasons people do this. One is because they're trying to cut costs and get it published as quickly and as cheaply as possible. And the other one comes from a certain amount of hubris or perhaps lack of self-awareness, where people think that they don't need editors, proofreaders, fact checkers, designers. So the issues that I see coming through with these books is, first and foremost, they tend to be, there's a lot of repetition. There's often a lack of flow. It's people just pouring all their knowledge and or passion onto a page. They want to share everything. They don't know where to cut. They don't see where they are repeating themselves. There's often very poor editing, typos, grammatical issues, punctuation issues. But then you've also got things like so lack of narrative flow. There's a lack of fact checking. But the other big issues that come through is that people who are writers are very often don't have a good grasp on design, and how a book looks is really, really important when it comes to reading. Even if a reader doesn't realize that that the appearance of the book is affecting their experience and how they're reading their book, it happens. So self-published books are often very badly spaced, either too much text crammed too closely on a page, or very uneven spacing. The photographs and graphics are often poor. Sometimes there's no photographs and graphics, which today we are readers that actually need photographs and graphics much more than the past. We've just been taught to think through that. Quite often the paper will be inferior, the binding will be inferior, and all these little things actually add up to a very poor experience, which is not to say that the content isn't worth 30 quid for the book, but people are not going to buy the book because it looks homemade and it's full of errors. The metaphor that I use or go back to is that no self-respecting athlete, no matter how natural their talent is, would head to the Olympics without a team of people, a dietitian, a coach, a physio, quite often a psychologist, quite often a personal assistant to organize their diary. All the top athletes in the world, no matter how talented they are, have a team of people behind them to make sure that when they go out there, they're going to operate at their best and they're not going to look like fools. So when I'm talking about tribe, I mean, get an editor, get someone to proofread, and don't, not family, get professional people who can criticize you, question your writing, help you design the book to look good. And the best books you will see in the acknowledgements. So, there's been a team of people behind that book.
Yeah.
So that's my little soapbox.
That's good advice. You took your soapbox, if you like, to Wine to Wine. This was your networking session. What kind of interaction and feedback or pushback, if any, did you get on that idea?
A number of people in the session were either thinking of writing a book or had started writing a book, but were in kind of the early stages. And I think that they wanted to understand how they would approach it and should they just self-publish by themselves. And so there was a lot of good interaction about, I passed around examples of books that had been self-published where the authors had not got anybody involved to show the difference between that and books which had a publishing team behind them. Okay. And I mean, it's instantly, it illustrates a point. And I think for a couple of people, it was quite, in the talks that we had, was quite thought-provoking for them. And I'm hoping that it means that, no matter how great your idea is and how knowledgeable you are and how great a writer, you need your team. You need a team behind you. Yeah. So,
yep, that's a good point. Well made. You mentioned in response to an earlier question your work with jr.com. Just explain for those of us who don't know what is jr.com. Who is JR? And how did you get involved all those years ago? 17 years, I believe you've been involved.
Yeah, going on 18 now.
Yeah.
JR is Jancis Robinson, and jr.com is her eponymous website, jancisrobinson.com. We are a digital publication, I guess you could say, that has global reach. We have quite a bit of free content, but most of our content is behind a paywall. So we have people who subscribe either on a monthly or an annual basis. And we publish probably two articles a day, 6 days a week. So there's a huge amount of content coming from, there's a small core team, but we have a lot of freelance writers as well. So the diversity of voices. We write news pieces, tasting notes, opinion pieces, science. We have a forum and we do tastings. So, yeah. That's jl.com.
Okay.
I grew up in a home with a teetotal home in a country that didn't make or drink wine, Zimbabwe. And so I didn't really come across wine until I came to the UK when I was 21 years old. And Jan says, I started to really, when I discovered wine, I very quickly became quite obsessed with it and was teaching myself everything I could find, and then enrolled in WSET. And I was doing my diploma by the time that I'm working in the corporate world. When I started thinking I would love to work in wine instead. So I contacted Jancis. Her website was really tiny then, and she answered all the emails. She was kind of a one-man band back then. And I asked her if I could work for her. And I said, look, I'm very well paid. I don't need to be paid, but I'll do anything for free. And she said, no, thank you. I don't have any work for you. And then a couple of months later, she contacted me and she said, well, I might have something for you. And this is back in the days when she didn't go to tastings with a laptop, so everything was handwritten. And she said, I have these notebooks. They were tiny little notebooks from all the wine dinners I've been to over the years. And she said, there's some pretty grand wines, tasting notes, but they sort of written at dinners. And she said, I've given them to various people and no one can read my handwriting. Would you like to give it a go? Could you transcribe them? So I was, yes, definitely, send them. So this thing arrived in the post with about 25 notebooks in it. Wow. And I said about this forensically. I read every tasting note I could find on her website to understand the language she used and her style. And I literally, on my corkboard, I had the different shapes of her letters. So I knew that the 5 different ways her E's would look. And 3 months later, I posted back her notebooks and emailed her a Word document with all the tasting notes in it. And that really started. And then about that time, she was moving for the first time from a sort of a WordPress style website into putting her tasting notes into an actual database. And it just so happened that in my early years, I'd done some database development. And so I started in my free time helping with uploading tasting notes into this brand new database, and at the same time helping to develop the database because we were trying to understand how it would work. And then eventually one day she said to me, look, if you want a job, I'll pay you. So I started working for her. Yeah. And I gave up my well-paid corporate career to work in wine.
Fantastic. And any regrets about that choice?
No, absolutely none. I mean, I've never made the money that I earned when I left, when I, at the age of 32 then. I've never earned the salary I was earning then, but you know what? I have wine. Sure.
Oh, okay. And tell us then a bit more. You mentioned this role of sustainability editor. You also are the book reviewer. Tell us a bit more about this sustainability editor. What does that involve?
Well, we first started it because I'm studying a degree, and it's been something that matters very much to me. When we were bought by Recurrent, the American company, they wanted someone to set up a kind of a sustainability hub. But at the time, we were also restructuring the website or looking at that. So it was more, how do we guide and collect the content? Because everyone in the team is very much focused on sustainability from an environmental point of view, but also from a social justice point of view. So, it's kind of embedded in the way that the team works and our focus. But now what we're trying to do, we're now under new ownership. So we are now looking seriously at building a hub which will be a resource that all of our readers can go to. So it's about collating all the content that we have that's related already there, which is quite a rich, database of sustainability stuff, but it's very difficult to mine out of the website if that's what you're looking for. So at the moment, I'm just trying to work out how we pull that together, what that will look like, and how it can become a really useful resource for our readers.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I know also here at the Italian Wine podcast, we've got such a rich back catalogue of content. But sometimes the question is, how do you enable listeners, in our case, to access that back catalogue in a meaningful way? Yeah. And one of the ways you do that, obviously, is to take a thematical approach to your content. Yeah. But that involves a fair bit of work going back through the back catalogue and deciding
which... It's a huge amount of work. Yeah. And you've also got to understand how would people want to use this? What would they be looking for? So you've got to kind of get into the heads of your readers, why they would need it. So to help you shape the searches and the themes and the connections between them as well. Mm-hmm. So it's challenging, but it's interesting.
It's interesting, yeah. And sustainability is obviously one of the big topical issues of our age. You've been involved in wine writing and the world of wine for nearly 20 years. Could you tell us about some of the biggest trends that you've seen in that period, some of the big issues or some of the big changes that have happened in the world of wine writing and in the world of wine over that period?
As we're just talking about sustainability, or perhaps another word is justice. So one thing that is being talked about more and more, but is also becoming central, is environmental justice, social justice, and economic justice. And this is definitely now becoming almost an underlying theme of wine writing. So when before it was all just about, what do wines taste like in Chablis and what's the soil and what's the climate. Now it is, can we continue to make Chablis if it gets too hot, or if there is not enough water, or if we have heat spikes so that the vine shut down, if the alcohol gets too high? It is, a lot of it is looking at how the landscape of wine going to change. Can we continue to make wine in Bordeaux, or do we change the grape varieties that we're growing in Bordeaux? So there's a real sense in writing about change, and how do we adapt to that change. Part of it is fear, because if resources like land and water resources are needed for food, then it may not even be an option to make wine, even if you could grow vineyards.
That's a terrifying thought.
Yeah, I mean, just like talking to producers in Roussillon, where there is only a certain amount of water, and they've gone through a couple of years of drought. And if the towns and villages need water for people, you can't irrigate your vines, no matter. And people have lost entire vineyards because of this. So sustainability and the other, when we talk about justice, the other thing that is very much coming through is talking about more being more inclusive. It's getting people from different backgrounds with different perspectives, different ways, different language. Like really interesting chatting to people from South Africa who, we're now talking about, should we be saying that, or should it be that Cabernet Sauvignon tastes of blackcurrant if you've never tasted a blackcurrant because it doesn't grow in your country? So, it's more about looking at inclusive language. So I think that's very much changing. So it's accessibility. One of the trends is just making wine more accessible. Slightly annoys me, but the whole demystifying wine, it's really about accessibility. I think one trend that I see, which is perhaps less positive, is that the line between content creation, advertorial copy is very much blurring, and versus independent wine writing. So there's a increasingly blurred, and I don't think that audiences necessarily are good anymore at telling the difference between what is advertorial and what is editorial. And I think AI is going to only accelerate that process and that blurring. So that's something we're going to have to look at very long and hard and see how we manage that.
Yeah, I mean, I think any one of those issues we could probably spend hours discussing and analysing, because they are massive issues facing the industry. I was particularly struck by what you said about this water prioritisation. When a community needs water for its basic needs, how do you justify making wine? That's a very interesting way of looking at that issue.
Yeah.
And it's a very complex issue as well. There's no easy answers, because wine production obviously brings employment and economic benefits to the community. So, you have to balance all these competing. So, as I say, I think it's something we could discuss at great length. But I want to ask you about one particular wine region that I know you've been focusing on recently, and that's Armenia. You recently won a Fortnum and Mason Drink Writer of the Year for a series of articles exploring that region. So what is it about Armenian wine that has captivated you so much in recent years?
Partly I knew nothing about Armenia. And so I think one of the good things about that is I went, again, without any expectation and kind of a blank canvas. And what I discovered was a fascinating wine region where the story was thousands of years of making wine. So there's archaeological evidence, and I've been to see it myself, a cave called Areni 1, where they found a winery inside this cave. They're kind of incredibly complex winery that they can date back to 4000 BC, so about 6,000 years old. And they had this long, incredible heritage of making wine. Part of the whole that Caucasus region, which is now very much believed to be where, domestic production of wine began. So there is this ancient story, but at the same time, I saw a country that was very, very scarred by the Soviet occupation. And the Soviets had decided, in their wisdom, they kind of split the countries up by, function. And Georgia was going to be the country that made wine, and Armenia was the country that was going to make brandy.
So it's a very Soviet approach, just kind of create these massive big blocks.
Absolutely. So Georgians, Armenians who'd been, like Georgians, had been making wine for thousands of years, and it was a part of their culture, rich part of their culture, had to stop making wine, like boom, like that. And they had to pull out their vineyards, their wine-focused vineyards, and they had to plant vines for brandy production. So massive, on a huge commercial scale, just vineyards where the wine was going to be distilled. And during that time, Armenians, unlike Georgians, stopped drinking wine. And in fact, quite a few of them told me that, in fact, the drink of choice became vodka. Because of, the Russian influence. So Armenia has had a tragic story in that there was a massive genocide during World War I, so Turkish genocide. And Armenia lost the whole of Western Armenia, and a couple of million people were killed. And a lot of people, Armenians, went into exile at that time. I think about 3 million Armenians now are kind of living in other countries specifically because of that genocide. And what happened is that quite a few of those Armenians who'd made money in countries like the US and Belgium and Italy decided to come home, and they brought with them the wine culture that they'd had in their countries that they had adopted, but also the memory of the wine and the wine culture that their parents or grandparents had in Armenia. So it was almost like a restart And so I found this country of incredible contradiction and contrast, quite vicious scars and poverty left by the Soviets, but also a beautiful country full of generosity, full of art and culture, beautiful food, a real vibrant sense of waking up and rediscovering something that had been lost. It was a moving story, but the other really exciting thing is that Armenia has a lot of indigenous varieties, completely autochthonous and unique, not even like Georgia, their own. And these vineyards and varieties grow incredibly high up. The altitude, the elevation of Armenia is very, very high. So the vineyards are kind of sit between 750 meters, and some of them going almost as high as 2,000 meters above sea level.
Wow.
Which changes everything. So even though it's quite a dry, hot country, that elevation means that these wines have freshness and finesse that is extraordinary, and completely unique profiles of flavors and structure and texture. I found it fascinating. I found it moving. I found it inspiring. It's probably the most exciting place I've been to in terms of wine.
It sounds absolutely fascinating, I have to say. And it sounds also, dare I say it, that there's a book in the offing, Tamlyn, about that particular area. I think it'd be a very, very interesting book that kind of somehow interweaves the history and the wine of the region.
Yeah, and the culture. Yeah, that would be my dream book if I could. I always said I'd never write a book, but after going to Armenia, I came back and said to my husband, I think I want to write a book for the first time in my life.
Yeah. Well, you heard it here first. Let's move on to a wine region closer to home. Certainly for me, this is the Italian wine podcast. So I have to ask you about your relationship with Italian wine. Which regions, which varieties, which styles are of interest to you, or which are exciting you at the moment?
We are very lucky at JR.com to have Walter Speller, who is our Italian guru, expert, lead writer, regional specialist, and he's amazing. So he covers all the really big, important topics and tastings, and nobody has their finger on the pulse of Italian wine, in terms of for UK writing like Walter does. But I'm lucky in that, when he was too busy and people came through asking if they could send samples, he sent them my way. So I've ended up tasting quite a lot of Italian wine, and have now built some really good relationships with producers. And this is not deliberate. I think if you went onto the website and looked through the tasting notes, you'll see that I'm completely not saying this for the sake of it. But I think my favorite Italian wines come from the Veneto region. And it's a funny thing, because everyone talks about Veneto as being the wine lake of Italy and the engine room where all the insipid, neutral bulk wine is made. I think it is a thrilling region. If someone told me you could only have one red wine, it would just be a bright, juicy Valpolicella. I could have that every day. My favorite
so could I.
Rosé. My favorite rosé is Chiaretto. I love Bardolino. I have about 30 bottles of Castosa in my cellar waiting to be tasted. I think Lugano makes the most beautiful whites. So I love the wines of the Veneto region, and I think that when you discover producers who are not making bulk wine, I think they're some of the best wines in Italy. The drinkability score of Veneto wines is right up there. I also think, I would not be the only one. I would be in a huge host of people to say I love Sicilian wines. I love Etna wines. And again, it comes back to what I think is so special about Italian wines is it's the freshness and drinkability. it's something that I see more in Italian wines than I see in any other wine, and I'm slightly obsessed with it. And it's bitterness. And when I'm talking about bitter, I'm talking about an appetizing, structural. It's in the way that we love coffee and olives and olive oil and quinine, tonic water, whatever. It's that bitterness that you almost feels medicinal. That when you have something that's got rosemary in it or thyme, and it's that little buzz. It is obviously generalizing, but I find that Italian wines do bitterness in that appetizing way more than any other country in the world.
Yeah.
I love Lambrusco. I think it's a massively unsung sparkling wine. I wish that we had far more Lambrusco on the shelves. And I've just discovered for the first time in my life an Umbrian wine called Gamay de Trasimeno, which is not Gamay, it's Grenache, but it's absolutely delicious. So Italy's got so much to offer that you're always learning, which is probably one of the nicest things about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Every day is a school day, and I hear you on Lambrusco as well. We're so lucky here because you can walk into any wine store or supermarket and you've got a wide selection of really lovely Lambrusco to choose from. So yeah, it's and so cheap as well. Really, for such good quality wine, really affordable. Interesting as well. Interesting as well what you say about this idea of bitterness, the buzz of bitterness, and of course, thinking about it, Italians do have a very well developed appreciation for bitterness, as you mentioned, coffee and olives and Campari. Even it's a sense that they really cultivate, really enjoy. Okay, let's move on to some of these books. If you haven't done your Christmas shopping, don't panic. We've got just the thing for the wine lovers in your life. You've chosen 5 books, Forrest Tamlyn, your top 5 wine books of 2024. First of all, tell us, how do you select books to review, and what's your approach when you're evaluating a book?
Generally don't have really a selection process. Books kind of arrive, they get sent to me, and I try and review all of them, and the only time that I will not review them is if it is so terrible that I think it would be unfair on the author to review it. And then I go back to them and I will give them the reason, and I'll say to them, look, I'm prepared to review it if you want, but I think it might be better for you if I don't. Occasionally, I will review a bad book, but only if the author is very well known, and I know that the author was capable of a better book, and I know that people will be buying that book. So I feel that it is my duty as a book reviewer to let people know that this book has fallen short of what it should have and could have been.
But none of these books fall into that category. I'm pleased to say these are your top 5, and in no particular order. Tamlyn, is that right?
I'm going to say it in the order that I think I would buy them.
Great, even better. Yeah.
My first one is the wine book that I kind of wish people would write more of. And it's called A Season for That, Lost and Found in the Other Southern France, by a guy called Steve Hoffman. And at first, when he contacted me to ask if I would review the book, my heart did sink a little bit, because these tales of autobiography is very rarely well done in the wine world. There's a lot of people who I think you should give your diaries to your family, and that's where they should stay. There's a lot of navel gazing and confessional style books, where I went to a wine region and it changed my life, can also be quite boring and quite, interesting maybe to the couple of people who are involved. But Steve Hoffman, he went to Paris as a young man, studied French, ended up being incredibly good at French, prided himself on speaking French so well that no one could tell that he was American, complete Francophile. Their kids in the US, so he's American, their kids went to French school in the US, and they decided, he uprooted the family and dragged them off to the Languedoc for 6 months because he wanted to kind of immerse them in French way of life. And it's hilarious because he basically takes a lot of pot shots at himself and his hubris and all of his little pretensions. But he's very funny at the way he does it. He is an exquisite writer. His passages, just the way that he describes things. But wine runs through the whole thing, which I think is a really valuable thing. The wine runs through it like a silver thread, but it never dominates it. You could know very little about wine and come away at the end of this book having learned a great deal of wine, but it also looks at culture and cultural differences, and you get to know a little bit about the Languedoc as a wine region, but also a region of people and a region of food and a region of seasons. So food is another kind of theme that runs through all of this. Yeah, it's a wonderful book, and you end up falling in love with him by the end of it.
Yeah, I had
falling in love with him well.
I had a very quick look at it yesterday. I haven't read the book, but I looked at the first chapter yesterday, and I have to say I really, really loved it as well. The opening chapter is just so funny. It's really detailed dad perspective on ordering food and trying to blend in a foreign country, and of course it all goes completely wrong. But as a dad myself living in a foreign country, it's totally relatable and absolutely hilarious as well. So his writing style reminded me of someone, I couldn't quite place it, but I was thinking it's maybe like Bill Bryson or someone like that. It's just really self-deprecating, hilarious anecdotes about daily life.
Yes, but really an acute observer of people and the people all around him.
Yes.
So while he's kind of also taking the mick out of himself and everybody else, he also writes with tremendous compassion and sensitivity, and he captures beauty in a very simple, pared down way. He's got quite a not sparse way of writing, but he never uses too many words, and it's a real. He's one of the most talented writers I have come across in all my wine book writing.
Yeah.
So
Do you want to read a short passage from that?
I want to read just to kind of capture a little bit about how clever he is. The first paragraph or the first passage, and then I'm going to take you back to the end of chapter 7. What do you think? Asked Mary Jo. About what? About everything, the village. We had just completed our first tour of Ortignac, population 800, burrow deep in rural Languedoc. This was home for the next 6 months. This is where our 2 kids, Ava 14 and Joseph 9, would go to school. This is what we had picked of all the options available. A knife edge of Mediterranean sunlight sliced the central square in two. To our right, in a hot wedge of shade, the white plastic tables and green plastic chairs outside the Café du Commerce were talkatively half occupied. 2 bikes leaned against the nearest table. A pair of men sat across from each other in tight jerseys and half shorts, with 2 glasses of white wine sweating on the table between them. I think it's a perfectly beautiful village, I said. It's just not a particularly beautiful village, is all. And then at the end of chapter 7, when you now know so much more about all of this, and they've just had this very awkward encounter with the people of the village, he finishes chapter 7 with going, I watched a single plodding cloud on the horizon like a raptor riding thermals, dragging its slow shadow across a line of hills. I get it, I said. Do you? Said Mary Jo. It was a good question. Did I? Or did I still think that everything was really just going to work out without any particular effort on my part because we were magically back in France? The kids stopped and pointed up a narrow street, and we nodded. We passed an untended hedge, alive with the gabbling and squeaking of a flock of starlings, and turned to climb the street the kids had chosen. The stone wall to our right belonged to the church, which we discovered when we reached the far corner, and found ourselves standing at the edge of the village's main square. A knife edge of Mediterranean sunlight sliced the square in two. Two men in bikers' uniforms sat across from each other at a cafe table, drinking late morning glasses of white wine. "What do you think?" asked Mary Jo. "About what?" "About everything. The village." And so he brings you full circle to where that book started.
Yeah.
And from chapter 8, the book really starts.
Okay.
So it's such a clever way of doing it. And the minute you read that, you're like, I remember that passage. And in using that symmetry, that mirror, he's turned the mirror on himself, and then he takes you to where the story of the book actually starts. So he had thought up until then that the story had started with him in Paris as a 19-year-old. When you get to that bit, you suddenly realize this story is not about him in Paris as a 19-year-old. This is about totally different. And that's how he pulls you in. He's such a clever writer.
Yeah, fantastic. I think that's definitely one that's gone straight to the top of my letter to Santa list. I found out those opening chapters really, really funny, and it sounds like you've got a lot of time for him as a writer as well.
Well, I've already bought it for about 3 people. So.
Okay, great. Let's take your second book then. Your second choice.
Okay, the second book is 1000 Vines, A New Way to Understand Wine by Pascal Lepeltier, who is a highly awarded, world-renowned sommelier. She is manager of a really top restaurant in New York, very wine-focused restaurant. Incredibly brilliant, knowledgeable person. And she has written this book. It's an extraordinary book that's quite difficult to even tie down. In my review of her book, I said, whatever my expectations, I'd forgotten them by the time I got to the end of the 5-page introduction. I'd walked into this book ready for yet another book about wine, and said I found I'd wandered into the literary equivalent of Gaia, a world where philosophy is fused with biology, where there are no seams holding anthropology to geology, where culture is infused with chemistry and spiritually sublimated to science. It is a book that defies categorization. She studied philosophy, and the way that, her philosophically disciplined, trained brain looks at wine, it's like she turns the world of wine as we understand it completely upside down and gives it a shake.
Yeah.
And what falls out is remarkable. And yet the book is full of science. I've got a shelf of wine science books behind me. There is not one that has the accuracy, up-to-date, in-depth science like this one. So she has combined science, culture, mythology, and then everything that we know traditionally about wine, about tasting wine, but just in such a different way. And what I loved about this book is that she is more about the questions. She asks questions that I've not heard anybody ask.
Yeah.
But she's also really comfortable with not having the answers or having several answers. She's happy with the mystery and mystique of wine. So I found it powerfully intellectual and disruptive and provocative, but in a gentle way. Enormously reverent book with huge respect for different opinions and for the science. And at the same time, she really embraces the spaces, the things we don't know. And
Again, I haven't read this book, but when you told me you were going to recommend it, I had a quick flick through it, and that's one of the things that struck me as well. The way she asks a question, which is such a simple question that no one has ever thought to ask it before. Like the one that struck me was, why do we use grapes rather than any other fruit for winemaking? And it's such a kind of almost stupid question that it's absolutely brilliant. Why do we use grapes? Why not any other fruit? And then using that as a starting point to then explain the science and the history and the culture behind winemaking. So yeah, I really enjoyed it from that perspective as well.
Yeah. And she has the courage to, what I really loved about this book is so many books that I come across on wine are trying to simplify wine. She has the courage to almost say to a reader, I'm not going to patronize you. I'm assuming that you are my intellectual equal. I'm assuming that you can grapple with complexity. And she has the courage that no one I know has had yet to weave really complex things together. And in doing that, create a totally different fabric of wine knowledge. One of the reasons that she wrote it is she said, I wrote the wine book that I wished I had when I started in wine. And she said, rather than encouraging people to think critically, wine teaching encouraged, under the pretext of objectivity, the unthinking memorization by rote of numbers of hectares, levels of alcohol, residual sugar, percentages of grape varieties, traditional styles, and so on. Solid information, no doubt, but it totally omitted to explain the whys and wherefores, and so failed to acknowledge that wine is above all a creation born of human desires and needs, a self-interested and mutable creation, if there ever was one. The standardized teaching and tasting of wine, this is what she found, was missing one essential point. Wine is the embodiment of our ability to play with natural constraints and to transcend them for our own pleasure, an invention constantly reconceived by the various civilizations that have embraced it. So there is not one wine, but 1,000 wines, not one vine, but 1,000 vines. This book was conceived to get disciplines talking to one another, and as in philosophy, to revisit their basic concepts and examine them to discover their genealogy and their raison d'etre with a view to uncovering the presuppositions that lie hidden beneath our contemporary notions of wines and vines. In other words, to teach readers to deconstruct prejudices and provide them with a key to unlock for themselves what is at stake with one of humanity's most beautiful and essential creations. And these stakes are high. You know, she asked one important question. Why is it so difficult for us to admit that a vineyard, far from being a miraculous gift from the gods or the bounty of the earth, is first and foremost a human contrivance? France's AOCs are as much political as viticultural. To read landscapes is to read the history of humanity, to understand terroir as a social fact, not just as climatic and geological facts, as a construction symbolizing the freedom of civilizations. And that's how the book kind of begins. The rest of it, it's magnificent in its structure, graphics. This is a book that you would need to read over a year, but you would come away a wiser, better person for it. It holds the conversations that I don't think we're having, or we're not having enough of. And I think it almost is a book that teaches us to think again.
Fantastic. What a thought-provoking and passionate review that was. So that's 1,000 Vines by Pascaline Lepeltier. All the books that we discuss today, I'll add to the show notes so our listeners can find them. Your third book, Tamlyn, for 2024?
Is Who's Afraid of Romane Conti by Dan Keeling. Dan is a brilliant writer. He's terrifyingly intelligent. He's quite wildly irreverent. So Dan is he's worked in the wine industry for many years. And in fact, he worked in the music industry beforehand. I think, like signing artists and record labels, to record labels and stuff like that. He's also a relentlessly curious person. His knowledge is incredible as a wine writer, wine importer, wine retailer. What else does Dan do? And he's author of a previous book as well. But Dan is also very disruptive. He even says, I'm a wine snob. And while he's, been involved with all the classics and stuff, He embraces change, like Pauline, but in a different way. He embraces looking at the wine world from a different angle. But whereas Pauline comes at it, interdisciplinary and with her philosophical background, Dan comes at it from his rock and roll music background. So kind of, I guess, a little bit more edgy. So he would probably put on a pair of sunglasses to look at the wine world. And this book is great because it's, apart from being stunningly beautiful, with fantastic photographs, which I think is something that's very important. We should celebrate photographers as much as we celebrate writers, because they are communicators, and a good photographer in the wine industry is a powerful communicator.
Yeah. One thing that struck me looking at this book was that it does have a very particular look and feel. The font is like this faded American typewriter style. And you mentioned earlier about the importance of the look and feel of a book. So how would you assess this book then in that department?
He's provocative, but deliberately provocative. And in Who's Afraid of Romanai Conti, even the title is taking something that is revered and worshipped and comes with hundreds of years of history and lots of money, and only the richest and most privileged can drink this wine. And he starts to deconstruct these things with kind of a casual irreverence. So you're talking about the font, which almost looks like someone's just written it up on an old typewriter. That sort of feel. And the cover, which is when I showed this to an Italian writer, he said he wouldn't pick this book up because he would think that it's not a serious book, and it doesn't. It's big pops of purples. He's using jazzy colors, but then the photographs, far from being a glossy book, the photographs are slightly matte with a certain filter, so there's a very slightly almost blurry haze to them paper. But he's doing all of this deliberately. He's creating an atmosphere and a feeling. He's evoking feelings in you before the book even begins.
Yeah.
And I think this is so there's some very, very serious wines in here, but Dan is approaching them with a kind of a playful, and guys, we don't need to be so terrified about wine. And also maybe we can be serious, but also we don't have to be serious. And I think it sums it up. The book was summed up in his introduction, where he writes, "There's a pernicious myth that you need to know much more than you do to enjoy great wine. Ditto, that you're either born with a good sense of taste or you're not. And that identifying a list of fruit aromas in a glass of wine makes it a more meaningful experience. None of this is true. Experts do not feel Chablis more intensely. Explaining isn't a requisite for pleasure. Indeed, wine appreciation's incessant reaching for objective facts about something so intrinsically unknowable often only breaks the spell." And then he says, don't get me wrong, pulling the legs off vino can be as academically fulfilling as studying quantum physics. But Who's Afraid of Romanai Conti is more about how drinking great wine makes you feel and celebrating its surrounding culture than what it tastes like or technical winemaking jargon. Great wine is something to be experienced. And that sums up this book to me. It is about teaching us maybe to put aside our pretensions, our assumptions that we have to approach all of this in a very particular way in order to appreciate wine, that we have to be incredibly knowledgeable, that we have to be privileged, that we have to talk in a certain way about wine in order to appreciate it. You go to wine appreciation classes, and these wine appreciation classes teach you, what the percentage of varieties is and what language you should use when describing a wine. And what Dan is saying is that is not wine appreciation, that appreciating wine is something different entirely. And the book is all about that. So I love that because it's not demystifying wine. It is embracing, again, like Pascaline, it's embracing the mystery and the magic and the metaphor and the mythology, but also making it accessible. That's what I loved about that book.
Yeah, great. And this idea of experiencing wine rather than simply just tasting it or appreciating it is a very contemporary take.
Yeah, and I think, so through this, he writes some very funny, but also some quite moving stories. And again, it's something that I look for in a book, is humor and emotion, because this makes us respond, evoking a writer who can weave in humor through his book or her book is a really powerful writer. It connects you, but the same way a writer that can evoke emotion of any kind, even anger, connects that book and the writer to the reader, and to the topic. So he's good with that.
Yeah, good. Okay, let's go on to book number 4 for 2024.
So this is the kind of book exactly opposite of the other 3 books. And it's the kind of book that I have come to dread and hate almost. And it's a book about how I'm going to tell you everything about wine, and I'm going to simplify it and demystify it. And it's called Wine Confident: There's No Wrong Way to Enjoy Wine by Kelly A. White. With a certain amount of world wariness that I opened this book, because I probably have to review 5 books like in this kind of genre, this format, every year. And you read the same things, and it's just the same things put slightly different ways, or not different ways at all. But Kelly is one of the few people who has got this right. And that is very high praise from me. So she's worked in hospitality for many years as a sommelier in the US. She has struck a balance that I think very few people have managed to do, in that she is trying to simplify things by stripping away all the bump. She is, to a certain extent, trying to demystify things, but she does it in a very joyful way that is not remotely patronizing. It is very practical. So it is very much aimed at, I would say, not at someone who knows a great deal about wine, and I don't think it's for someone who knows nothing about wine, but perhaps it's someone who's really starting to get excited about wine, but would like to just be a bit more confident about their knowledge without having to, say, do a WSET course or something like that. This book is, and when I say practical, intensely practical. She talks through really useful tips on how to buy wine, how to choose wine off a wine list, how to talk about wine with people who might know more than you or less than you. Basically, how not to look like a twit. And it's colourful. It's really well laid out. I think because of there's colour and humour. It's straightforward. It could easily appeal to someone who's in their early 20s as it could appeal to someone in their 40s who's if you're starting to come into wine. It's very modern. Everything in here is up to date. She's very honest. She talks through things like critics and scores and wine media that's the other great thing, she doesn't get in a soapbox about anything. So she looks at the divisive issues and gives people the space to make their own decision around which side of the divisive issue they want, or make them aware of the divisive issue in the first place, and then which side they would want to go. I think that this is a great Christmas present as a book if you are starting to get excited about wine, want to know more, but don't want to go into great big geeky depth. It does what it says on the tin. When it says wine confident, this book would make you more confident about wine. Yeah,
fantastic. Kelly was a guest recently on the Italian Wine podcast, and I really enjoyed our conversation that we had about this book. my question to you was going to be, what is it about her writing that sets this apart from other similar books on the market? But I think you've obviously answered that very well. I mean, it's joyful, it's intensely practical, it's colourful. There's a layout, there's a humour, it's modern, and it's well balanced. So yeah, I completely agree with you on all of those points.
What I love about this book, I felt like I kind of knew Kelly by the end of it. It feels really conversational.
Yes.
So chatty, but not in a silly chatty way.
Sure.
There are quite a lot of, and I think she even mentions that at the beginning. There are quite a lot of these books that they baby. Yeah, there we go. So she says an example of what I call wine baby talk. And while it might work for some people, I found it infuriating. And a lot of these books sort of go, oh, are you really confused? And, wine is so terrifying. And, most people I know who want to learn more or are kind of like, oh, well, can you choose something for me on the wine list because you know more about me? They're not terrified. They're not terrified when they go to the supermarket. They're just sticking with the wine they know because they're in a rush. We love to be dramatic in the wine industry and say that we're terrifying people and we're intimidating them. I don't think that that's the case, but I think, yeah, a book like this doesn't baby talk you. It's conversational. It's really lovely, easy read. She doesn't get into any navel gazing stuff.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And also the idea that you felt you knew Kelly just by reading it, I was absolutely the same. And I interviewed her, I felt like I already knew her in some way. Okay, let's take your final book, your final recommendation for 2024.
Book called Natural Wine, No Drama, by someone called Honey Spencer. It's an incredibly difficult topic to write a book about. I've read a number of books on natural wine, and they tend to be quite polemical, quite evangelical. Natural wine, even today, still divides the wine world into those who are firmly on the classic side and those who will, drink anything. But what Honey brings is a huge amount of personal experience. She worked for Noma or in Copenhagen. Her husband, I think, was a chef for Noma, and she's worked in natural wine bars. She's traveled all around the world, selling natural wine. As a sommelier, buying natural wine, being with natural winemakers, and she tackles the topic, I think, in a very even-handed, warm way. It's difficult because if you writing a book like this, you're coming from a very strong angle anyway. This is a book because she believes in natural wine and she loves it. So to be balanced and measured about that is quite difficult. And there are some things in this book that I don't 100% agree with. She makes some statements and follows some lines of argument that I don't believe, even though I like natural wine. But she explains what natural wine is. She goes through some of the jargon. She goes through the objections to natural wine. She tackles all the difficult things like faults, when is a fault a fault? She has a way, and she tells quite a bit of it through the stories of people, whether they are producers, writers, people who own wine bars, people who have wine shops. So she really tells it through the human connection. And I think it's the one thing that I loved about Honey's book is that you feel the human connection all the way through. At the same time, while she is justifying the science, but she also tackles really practical things. Like the book has at the end a calendar of natural wine events. So how can you learn more about it? Is drinking natural wine different from drinking more conventionally made wine? So kind of from temperature to glassware. So she does tackle it from a very practical way. She looks at food that goes with natural wine. So if you are a foodie, She and her husband own and run a restaurant in London called Sune, which is obviously natural wine focused. And they're very food focused people. So it's very much about the flavors and textures. So again, there's some beautiful recipes in here, but that talk through how and why natural wine is a little bit different with food than conventionally produced wine. So it's full of really good stuff. And what it does is, I think if you had never come across natural wine, it would definitely pique your curiosity. You would read this book and you would want to learn more about it. If you were someone who was standing on a, not quite sure what you think about natural wine, maybe intimidated by it, it would bring you to the table. And I think it would get you to look at it in a different way. And I think if someone was anti-natural wine, I think this would challenge your beliefs and maybe help you to be slightly less hardcore in the opposing camp.
Yeah.
And I like that because it's done gently. It's not done in a judgmental way.
How would you get these anti-wine or anti-natural wine or natural wine skeptics to read the book? That might be the only problem. At Wine to Wine, there was a natural wine tasting. And I know a number of people who refuse to even go into the tasting because they are so anti-natural wine. So how do you get them to read a book like this if they won't even taste the stuff?
Give it to them for Christmas.
That's a good idea. It joins the pile of unwanted socks and other traditional.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell them that there's some really good recipes in the book, but they have to read through the book to get to them.
Okay. And a lovely name as well, Honey Spencer. I think that's a lovely name. So that's Honey Spencer, natural wine, no drama.
Yeah.
Fantastic. I want to thank you really for those incredibly passionate and thought-provoking and detailed wine reviews. You can see how much thought and attention and passion you put into each and every book that you review. And these are obviously some fantastic books, some of the best ones I think we've seen this year. And I'm already looking forward to adding them to my massive pile of books that I need to find the time to get around to reading.
There's a word for that.
Yeah. Just to bring things to a close, two more questions. What are you looking forward to seeing in 2025? What books or what writers or what themes can we expect or would you like to see in 2025?
Oh, it's a really good question. I would love to see more wine fiction. I think it's a very unexplored area and it's a great way to teach people about wine without them feeling like they're being preached at or taught. And I'd love to see more interactive wine books that cross the line between digital and hardback paper. The use of QR codes so that you can go in different directions in a book. So it allows you to sort of partly create your own story with interactive QR codes, but also with every choice that you make, you're learning something different about wine. So I would love to just see much more entwining wine and fun, wine and story. I would love to see more mythology and metaphor, and going back to the real art of storytelling. So my dream would be to find the next Tolkien who's going to write The Lord of the Rings, but about wine.
The Lord of the Wine.
Yeah, and probably in terms of the book I'm most looking forward to coming out, that I know is coming out next year, would be Natasha Hughes's book on Beaujolais.
Wow.
Because that's a thrillingly exciting wine region. I know Tasha spent a huge amount of time in Beaujolais, pouring herself into this. And I don't know when anything was written, in depth about Beaujolais, when last, if ever. So I think that's going to be a very exciting book when it comes out.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. Beaujolais is one of my guilty pleasures, even though I don't suppose there's anything to feel guilty about.
No.
But yeah, I visited the Beaujolais region last year and was blown away really by the hospitality and just something about that region I really loved. I had one of those dad moments as well that Steve Hoffman might write a story about we went to a flea market in Lyon, and there was a small kind of cafe, very French restaurant on the periphery of the market, and we were trying to choose something suitably French and suitably sophisticated to eat. Without really, I don't speak any French, didn't really understand anything, and the dish I think we eventually decided on, or one that I thought that sounds quite nice but not too French, was something called salade de mousseau or mousset. My French pronunciation is probably not the best. And I thought, well, a salad, you can't really go wrong with a salad. But it was only when the plate arrived, it turned out to be a plate of raw pig snout. So this mousseau is like there were four of us, we'd each ordered it, so we had these massive plates of raw pig snout. And there was just no way we could eat it, so I think we had to order another couple of bottles of Beaujolais and drink the wine and discreetly put the pig snout to one
Couldn't
side.
go more wrong.
Disaster. But
oh, that's wonderful.
But no, I mean, I do really genuinely love Beaujolais, so I'm delighted to hear there's a book coming out on that subject.
Yeah, one to watch for.
Okay. Finally, where can our listeners follow you, and where can we read your writing?
Well, most of my writing is on jancesrobinson.com. Otherwise, I can be followed on Instagram, just at Tamlyn Currin. And most of the stuff that I put in Instagram goes onto Facebook at the same time.
Okay. Tamlyn, thank you very much for being my guest today on Book Club. It's been a really enjoyable and interesting conversation. And your passion for these books really just comes through. So thank you very much for being so generous with your time today.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's been really enjoyable.
And perhaps we'll get you back on next year when you can tell us about your books of 2025. Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. And we'll see you next time on Book Club with the Italian Wine Podcast. Thanks for joining us on Book Club with the Italian Wine Podcast. Tune in again next month when we'll get between the vines with another great wine book. Remember, our show notes, including full details of all the books we've discussed today, are available at italianwinepodcast.com or wherever you get your pods.